All right, so deck tech time. Hey, welcome to my YouTube channel. It's been about a year since I posted anything, but here we are about to play a league with Thalia Stompy. This is a deck popularized by Spider Space over the last couple of years, a good buddy of mine. We played in a few GPs together, and yeah, really good Magic player. Also a taxer, just like me. Loves to play his Thalias and his thick Thalias and his Arbiters and his Ghost Quarters, and I've just kind of been in love with Arbiter and Ghost Quarter ever since I recognized the interaction between the two cards. I was like, whoa, Strip Mine in Modern? I'm gonna build that right now. And I went up to at the local game store when I thought of it. It wasn't like something that nobody had ever thought of before. It was already like a fringe deck in Modern at the time, but it was pretty early in Modern's history when not that many people were trying that. And I was just like, oh wait, Arbiter, Ghost Quarter, Arbiter and Ghost. Whoa! I was like, I need to go buy these right now. Anyway, tangent aside, I love playing with Thalias. I love playing with Arbiter and Ghost Quarter. And this is a turbo version of Taxes. What I mean by turbo is you're playing 7 ways to turn 1 a 2-drop Hate Bear or Hate Piece. So in this deck, those Hate Bears / Hate Pieces are Leonin Arbiter, Thalia Guardian of Thraben, and Chalice of the Void. So the way you can turn 1 these cards is our old friend, the Ape Spirit, Simian Spirit Guide. One of the cards that's probably up there on the ban list watch for Modern. A lot of people think that this is a little too powerful, and I am somewhat in the same camp. It just allows for turn 1 kills. It's like without this card, you can't really win the game on turn 1. It's the only free mana. It's the only Lotus Petal in Modern. Besides Mox Opal. So this and Mox Opal are the only free mana on turn 1 you can get. So I guess that's not totally true. Mox Amber counts as well. I've cast Thalia on turn 1 with Mox Amber, but for the most part, with a lot of deck building restrictions, the Moxes can do it, and Simian Spirit Guide without any deck building constrictions can do it. So yeah, Simian Spirit Guide might get banned at some point, but it's free red mana on turn 1, including a white source, which could be a cavern or a plain, Sunbaked Canyon, Battlefield Forge. You can cast Thalia on turn 1. You can cast Arbiter on turn 1. With Chalice, you don't even need a white source. You just need any land and a Simian Spirit Guide. The other way to do it, because I said 7, is this card right here, Gemstone Caverns. So this only works on the draw. So you're generally boarding one of these out when you're on the play, and you'll probably see me do that in some of my matchups, probably all of my matchups in the league. So yeah, when you're on the play, you don't want too many of these because it is legendary. So that's a big downside, because you draw the second one, it's just like a Lotus Petal now, which is really bad for a land that already only taps for colorless if it's not in your opener on the draw. So it's a high risk, high reward card, but the reward is very high, like being able to turn 1 your Chalice, turn 1 your Arbiter, and then post board, turn 1 your Rest in Peace, turn 1 your Stony Silence, turn 1 your Tecatli Honor Guard. These are all really powerful plays in the right matchups. And this is why I call it Turbo Taxes, also known as Thalia Stompy, also known as Death and Staxes, also known as I don't know, there's probably a bunch more names, but yeah, Mono White Eldrazi comes up on Goldfish a lot, or like Eldrazi and Taxes is what it's called on Goldfish right now, I think. So if we manage to 5-0, it'll go up there as Eldrazi and Taxes, even though I think Eldrazi and Taxes is a very different deck, and it looks kind of like this. But let's go back to the main point here, which is that we're going over the deck list. So this deck, like I was saying, is trying to turbo out a Hate Piece on turn 1 and then close the game out with Thoughtseize 4/4, Thought-Knot's here, and really angry Reality Smashing 5/5 Trample Haste. We're playing 4 Eldrazi Temples, so we do get to power these cards out fairly early. They're not really a 4-drop and a 5-drop. Very often with this deck, you can cast Reality Smasher as early as turn 3. I've even done it on turn 1. It's difficult. Obviously, you need 3 Simian Spirit Guides or like a Gemstone Caverns and a Temple and 2 Spirit Guides, but you can turn 1 a Reality Smasher, which feels really good, let me tell you. You can also turn 1 a Thought Knots here, but normally this is more of a turn 2 play. Displacer is also a card that benefits from the Eldrazi Temple, very good against creature decks, very good at keeping our creatures alive, and there's further uses with Displacer when you combine it with Thought Knots here. The something that's not super obvious that this deck can do is just kind of lock your opponent out of the game and win without damage. The way to do that is you play this card, Tocatli Honor Guard. You play Chalice of the Void on whatever number they need to be able to blow up your worship, and then you have a worship in play. Now you can't lose the game because their Nature's Claim is covered from Chalice of the Void. Their Knight of Autumns can't kill your worship because Tocatli Honor Guard's in play. Tocatli Honor Guard doesn't always work because they could just dismember it or something, but like against humans, they don't have any outs to worship with Tocatli Honor Guard in play if they don't draw like their one of dismember on a turn where you can't displace your own Tocatli Honor Guard to keep it alive. So then you get a Thought Knot in play, and even if they have just a crazy board, you can eventually win the game. There's one way with Winds of Abandon. You can overload this for 6 mana, wipe their whole board, and attack them and win. But the other way is to just blink Thought Knot Seer until they die, because they have to draw a card every time Thought Knot Seer leaves the battlefield. And generally you're going to have Tocatli in play against humans, but so you're not going to steal a card from their hand, but you're just going to make them draw. And you can eventually draw a few temples and like a bunch of other lands and do this like 3 times a turn. They're drawing 3 cards a turn, they can't win, and you just mill them out. It's a really annoying way to win, and it's not my favorite, but having an alternate win con is really nice in a deck archetype that generally doesn't have alternate win cons. So yeah, it's a little bit nice. It's a little bit refreshing to have a different way to attack your opponent. 3 Winds of Abandon is what I'm playing right now, and 2 Dismember as the removal suite. Spider Space likes 3 Dismember over the 3rd Winds, but I'm on 3 Winds because I like the out of the Worship Lock and then drawing Winds. It's a really powerful effect, and then you just attack them, and you don't have to do the Thought Knot Seer stuff. So that's pretty cool, but mainly the reason I like Winds over the 3rd Dismember is Hogak. Really, game 1 against Hogak is pretty difficult, especially on the draw, and Dismember does not kill the namesake card of Hogak, whereas Winds of Abandon does get it off the battlefield. And I think that's really important because if you have a Displacer, you have an early Arbiter, an early Chalice, you can stop them from doing most of what they're trying to do, and then in tandem with being able to remove their turn 2 Hogak with the Winds of Abandon, you can usually get them in game 1. Whereas if you don't draw Winds, Dismember is not really going to cut it, because obviously their creatures come back mostly. Dismember works against Carrion Feeder. It works as a one-time way to stop a Vengevine. So it's like not just dead. Like you actually don't probably even board Dismember out, but it is not good. It's definitely not as good as Winds, because with Winds you can take care of Hogak. You can eventually wipe their whole board, which I've done a few times already. I've overloaded it. It's pretty rare, but the games do go long because this deck is more of a lockout deck. You have Chalice, you have Thalia, you have Arbiter, you have Displacer to just keep blinking stuff. You have Thalia Heretic Cathar, which also slows your opponent down and also blocks Vengevine very well. This in tandem with Arbiter means like if your opponent plays a fetch land, they're not using that mana for like 3 turns. It's really, really good when you have those 2 out at the same time and your opponent is already behind and they're like, play a fetch tapped, go. Like, it just feels so good. But yeah, this deck is very hateful, very early game oriented. A lot of it comes down to your mulligan decisions, and whether or not your opponent's on a deck that is good or bad against what you mulliganed into. So sometimes you're on the draw and you really just need that turn 1 Thalia, and you go for it, you get the turn 1 Thalia, and your opponent goes turn 2 Elvish Archdruid or whatever, and you're just like, oh, it's elves. Well, Thalia sucks. And you've just wasted a Simian Spirit Guide. Not wasted, but you've used an extra card in your hand, so you kind of discarded a card to cast your turn 1 2/1 First Strike, which is immediately irrelevant against their deck. And that is a way you can lose. But once you get to game 2, you know what you're up against, and you know what your mulligans should be. So generally, you're going to have a pretty good matchup against most decks games 2 and 3. Whereas in game 1, you definitely can win. It's not like we're a terrible game 1 deck. It's just you might have the wrong hate piece for their deck. And you might put a lot of resources into casting the wrong hate piece for their deck because you just don't know what they're on. So that's one of the weaknesses of the deck. But let's look at the sideboard real quick. We've got Rest in Peace as a 4-of. There's just a lot of GAC running around right now. It's GAC summer. If you're watching this and GAC has already been banned, then congratulations, you don't have to play against GAC every other round, but right now you kind of do. It's probably about 25% of the metagame at any big tournament, or I would expect at any big tournament it would be about 20 to 25% of the metagame, maybe even more than that, because it is by far the best deck in the format. Any version of it is like basically tier 0. So we want 4 Rest in Peace. We want to turn 1 that card, and we can with Simian Spirit Guide and Gemstone Caverns. So we can easily beat them if we're willing to mulligan for a turn 1 Rest in Peace. It's not a guarantee if we mull to 4 that we're going to hit a turn 1 Rest in Peace, so it's not something that we need to like mulligan that aggressively for, because turn 1 Arbiter is also insane against them, and so is turn 1 Chalice. So we have a lot of good plays, and with wins and some creatures that attack, we don't have a bad matchup against Hogak. I think it's actually pretty good, but it's a deck that can put 20 power on the board on turn 2 very easily, like 50% of games or something like that. So it's definitely not an easy matchup. It's just not a bad matchup either. And I definitely think it's the best deck in the format. So 4 Rest in Peace, 2 Stony Silence. It's great against any of the artifact-based decks. Urza, Wurza, Wur Prison, Affinity, Hardened Scales, Tron also plays tons of artifacts, so Stony Silence very good against them. Tocatli Honor Guard is mostly for creature matchups like goblins and humans, spirits as well. It's not as good against spirits, but it's good against Knight of Autumn and Deputy Detention, and potentially Reflector Mage that spirits has been playing a little bit as well. And then Worship also against the creature decks and against Burn. They're not great cards, but they do the job that you need them to do pretty well. They're a little bit clunky. I mean, Honor Guard's not that clunky, but Worship's a little clunky. It's just kind of a necessary evil against the decks that are just going to get underneath you and not care about your Thalias and Arbiters, which are humans and spirits and goblins and that kind of thing. They don't really care that much about these cards. Even Chalice, they don't care that much about. So if they get underneath you, you really need something that just says, like, you can't win the game. And it's unfortunate because this card's, it is pretty clunky, but just a necessary evil there against those creature decks that can get under. Hazoret is kind of our Jund and control card. It just is kind of Reality Smashers 5 and 6. It's indestructible. It also has 3 mana, discard a card, it deals 2 damage. So it gives you a way to win through like an Ensnaring Bridge. It gives you a way to keep attacking your opponent while they're like just have a huge board and you have a Worship in play. So it's kind of good against those decks where you're going to bring in Worship. And in general, we thought that it would probably be better than Endbringer, because Endbringer costs 6, this costs 4. Endbringer obviously can be only 4 mana if you have 2 temples, but it's pretty rare. And we have, with the Simian Spirit Guides and potentially Gemstone Caverns and the 2 Battlefield Forges, the 2 Cavern of Souls that we can name God with, which is one of the main reasons you want to play Hazoret, I think, because you get to just play Cavern of Souls and say God, which I really want to do at some point. But Sunbaked Canyon also adding red. So we have like 8 or 9 land sources that make red for Hazoret, and then 4 Simian Spirit Guides, giving us 12 total, which I think is enough for the Hazorets, and I think is enough for the Wear and Tear in the sideboard. And Wear and Tear is just a really powerful artifact enchantment hate card against Hardened Scales. It can kill 2 things, like Hardened Scales and an artifact. Really powerful. You don't always fuse it, but you don't need to. It's just like a good disenchant that sometimes gets 2 things. And yeah, it's just pretty good. So yeah, that's the deck. We're going to jump into a league right now and hopefully get that trophy.